Welcome to Senate Chat, the Utah Senate's time for question and answer from the public and from the media. Those who are watching us on the internet, please send in your questions. We'd be happy to address those today. We've had a storm move in, and it's like we got whiteout going on here at the Capitol anyway.
Kind of nice, isn't it?
I'm excited for maybe some new snow on Saturday. We wanted to also just kind of preface our remarks today. You may have noticed that SB 190 was read in today, as well as Senate Resolution 2 and SJR 15. Senate Bill 190 amends the Open and Public Meetings Act, dealing with an issue that arose in a 2014 bill that needs some clarity. That was passed with Senator Maine's bill, and she can address your questions regarding the 2014 bill. And we've discovered since then that it's made some difficult process for us in our conference committees and our rules committee. So as a fix to that, we are going to create more transparent and more transparency and more access to our conference committees and to our rules committee. So you'll notice in those resolutions, SR2 and SJR 15, a new process for those committees. And mainly it's just greater access so that the press and interested public members can attend those conference committees. Senator Main, would you make any other comments you'd like to make before we take questions?
You know, sometimes when you make good intentions, and I passed a legislation that the 24-hour notification got caught in. So what this legislation says, we're going to fix that problem, and to make sure really there's more clarity and transparency, we have resolutions that I think it's going to be much better than what I envisioned in my piece of legislation. So we're going to have, they're going to announce the meetings for the rules, conference, and sifting committees, and there are going to be announcements from the dais. We're going to have electric notification. We're going to have the website will have that information on, and then the social media. So really, it's more transparent than what I envisioned. So I'm happy with this. We just had to fix it because it got caught up with the 24-hour notification.
So what exactly was happening? I mean, what wasn't getting noticed, I guess, or what wasn't being put up on a 24-hour notice?
We had the conference, the sifting, and the rules. And so, unbeknownst to us, we just had to fix that because they weren't in that 24-hour notification. And so when we found that out, we're going to fix it and then have it more transparent than what I even envisioned. So it's a good fix for this.
It was brought to our attention, our legislative council brought it to our attention recently that their interpretation of that statute that we passed 2 years ago included the 24-hour notice for rules and for conference committees, which procedurally is impossible for us to deal with. And so we've wanted to create a greater access or greater transparency, especially for the conference committees. Rules committee is not as big an issue, at least in our minds, because you folks in the press and otherwise you can get to the press. It's pretty consistent here in the Senate. And so with this, clarifying that in statute so that we don't get caught up in this 24-hour notice, simultaneously we want to create greater access to mainly our conference committees.
So if I'm to understand right, Mr. President, for the last 2 years, the Senate has been breaking the law?
Well, we didn't know. We didn't have that clarification. And so this is something that I guess could be interpreted a couple of different ways, and just came to our legal staff's attention. It wasn't the intent of the sponsor to bring those committees under that 24-hour notice rule or statute. That was never the intent of the legislation. But now that we have at least an interpretation of that by our legal staff, it's time to address it. Otherwise, we'd have addressed it when we figured it out before.
It gives clarity. I mean, obviously there's some times when there's lack of clarity, and I think we want to give clarity. You just heard a Rules Committee announcement as the president left the floor, and that had to have 24-hour notice. We just bogged down. We wouldn't make it through bills in a year, let alone 45 days. And so that it's procedure that we've used for years and years, and I don't think there was any intent with Senator Maine's bill to circumvent that procedure. So we just need to clarify it. And with clarifying it, I think the electronic notice and everything else is a great way to do it. We live in a new age right now where we can communicate in more ways than just announcing it over the dais.
And bring it to the forefront now, it gives us all these other tools we never even thought about 2 years ago, Twitter and all those. So now the social media is involved. I mean, there's much more transparency than the piece of legislation even encompassed. So I think it's a good thing. It's a good fix.
But the basic problem is still you have to give notification that these things are going to happen. While I understand that in the Rules Committee, I mean, things are kind of moving fast. You've got bills that are coming and going. You still have to provide the public with notification. So how are you going to remedy this situation exactly where you provide 24-hour notice to the public and yet still be able to get work done?
President?
I think that's one of the things in the process that these fixes tend to deal with, and that's giving us that latitude to be able to do that. When you do a conference committee in the last 3 or 4 days, there's no way you could do a 24-hour notice and still get the bill into a conference committee and back and acted on. So this alleviates that 24-hour notice, but it still gives, by rule, that the president, speaker has to make that announcement from the dais that there will be a conference committee meeting, where it's going to be held, at what time it will be held, and that gives that short notification, and we'll use the social media, of course, to point that out to the general public and to the media on where those meetings will be held. So there's more notification now than there has been. But when we get down to the last few days in the process, we need that latitude to be able to take care of the business that we have and that we've traditionally taken care of.
I think to be clear on your question, Ben, is that the interpretation of the language we passed in 2014 now says that we need to do 24-hour notice. We're saying that that's impossible to do in the process. So Senator Maine's bill, SB 190, goes back and doesn't require now the 24-hour notice. But instead of that, we're going to give a notice from the dais, and also through electronic media and on our website, of the location and time of those committee meetings, and make sure that there's access for our media and for people who have some interest in it.
And functionally, we were never able to give it that 24-hour notice before Senator Maine's original bill or after her original bill. So this matches the practice we've been using, but it adds another degree of transparency with electronic notifications, which were in place before, which actually significantly adds transparency.
So under the Open Meetings Act, as I understand it, but votes that were taken in meetings that were not properly noticed are nullified. Is there a concern that every Rules Committee meeting and Conference Committee meeting for the last 2 years that this may invalidate any action taken by those committees since they're...
I mean, I guess you could make that argument, but our attorneys would argue that we're trying to clarify the law because it wasn't clear, and so that we were functioning properly under the law for the last 2 years. But now that there's some concern about that, we want to make it clear so we don't get caught up in that problem.
I don't think notification or lack thereof of the actions of the legislature would necessarily, by the statute itself, invalidate any law that was put on the books by them. You might, I mean, you could give it a challenge, but it'd be an interesting challenge, I think.
Be interesting.
Is there any other remedy, though? I mean, you're clarifying the language, but I guess when there's a violation of the open meetings law, is there any potential punishment the legislature faces? Are you potentially staring down the barrel of a lawsuit for violating the open meetings law, or are you just leaving yourself vulnerable for past actions?
I mean, it's hard to say. I'm not here to interpret the language. We're just responding to a clarification, and because if that stood up, if the requirement to have a 24-hour notice was held up in court, that would be a problem for our process, and it's unwieldy. It just doesn't work, and but there could be an upholding of the need for the process we've been involved in over the last 2 years since the passage of, I can't remember what bill it was, SB 113.
Right.
That we were functioning properly, and there's a different interpretation of it. This is a clarification of that. We would maintain that we have been properly functioning for the last 2 years, and that's the position we would take if there was a lawsuit.
We think we have some of the best legal minds around in our ledge research, and to my understanding, this was an internal catch. And it's kind of an internal as they review the statute, and so, I mean, I take my hats off to it. We have so many lines of statute, and I hate to say it, how many bills this session, and so many issues that as they catch these things, we correct things like this every year. And they're very good at what they do, and they're very good at trying to make sure that we're conservative, stay as far away from the line as we possibly can, and this just does that. I think there's questions, ambiguities. I don't think, in my mind, there hasn't been a lot of, none of us thought we were doing anything that wasn't just according to our normal procedures. And this just helps qualify that, clarify it, so a lot of probably.
And I would add too, I'm sure that Senator Maine would tell you, she did not intend to make this 24-hour rule as such in our process, nor did any of us on the legislature understand that. So I think when the question came up, it could be interpreted the other way. We keep it the way it is. Let's just make sure there's no problem. And I think Senator Maine has been very clear on that.
So you did, when you drafted this law, you did not intend to put this in the rules or the conference committees in this 24-hour notice?
No, and it just, as soon as we were made aware of it, we need to make this transparent. How can we do that? So that was the conversation. And I see it, we fixed it, and we've made it better. It's more transparent, and that was brought to our attention too. How can we make this better? And I think I'm satisfied with what we've done. And as the good senator says, we fix things all the time. And when it came to our attention, we went to work to have a fix for it, to make it better. And I think we have.
Senator Hilliard is also, I mean, he has been on our process committee, conference committees has been part of our concern for a number of years, and you can address that also, Senator Hilliard.
I was just going to say this. I think if the litigation were filed with the very strictest interpretation our legal counsel said, just to be safe, I think a court could listen to the same thing and say, I agree with Senator Maine that her bill did not intend that, and read it that way, and there's no problem with that. It was just remove the clap or any question.
Any further questions on, I think you should also know there's a House resolution too that will address the House rules. Their rule on the Rules Committee.
You know, I'm in other areas of the country, I've had questions about legislation in Utah, and I'm having people that can pull up, and you do this all the time, as you look at floor debates, or you look at debates in committees, and I'm just so impressed with Utah's transparent system. People in the rest of the nation are actually dumbfounded. by what we allow and what we have on the internet as access. And it's great for the public. My wife actually listens to us occasionally when she's at home. I wonder what she but it's pretty fun to be able to find out what's going on here and have that transparency. So this is part of it.
Thank you.
Any other
Thanks.
questions on other issues? Yes.
Senator Urquhart just came out with a bill that would repeal the death penalty in Utah. What are your thoughts on that?
It's been on the books a long time. I think it's a valid question for us to debate. At this point, I personally am undecided about where I would vote on that. Does anybody else have any issues? I mean,
I think it's a
Senator-
bill that's worthy to be heard and debated. It's an issue that's always being debated in the public, especially whenever we have an execution in the state of Utah. And I think it's worthy of continuing that discussion and debate to see where the public opinion and where we really believe we should be on that issue.
Senator Hilliard, you've been there a long time. Has this come up before?
It has. It's come up a number of times before and debated. I guess the issue you really have to balance is there may be a majority of people who have not had their lives impacted by murder. And they say, you know, why? The few times I've had a chance to visit with victims' families of people who've been murdered, let me tell you, they have a pretty strong feeling. I was impressed the other day. There was a potential murder, and the family stepped forward and said, we don't want the death penalty. I think that can be done. But I think for us, to look at it in abstract, compared to those who've actually gone through that horrible experience, I think we have to be careful. I personally am one who would not vote to do away with the death penalty. I would hope that it's used very, very sparingly and very carefully, but I think the society, and especially victims who've had family members murdered, have a pretty strong feeling about it.
Does that answer that question? Okay. Any others? Do we have anybody sending questions in over the internet?
We have 3 quick questions. The first
Great.
one is from a parody account on Twitter. They want to know, will the Senate consider reinstating the blue spruce as the rightful state tree?
What?
No, who's screwed?
Let's see, the sponsor is here, the Aspen bill, Senator Okerlund.
You know, I've had so many comments from people who, after we passed the Quake and Aspen bill, have said thank you for that. Because you go in our mountains and you see those Quake and Aspen trees and you see the history that's written on a lot of them, along with just the beauty and what they add to the forest. But as we look at the health of our forests and we actually consider how to have a healthy forest, an aspen stand is the most important tree that we can have, and we love the spruce as well. They're a part of it. They're part of the mosaic, but a healthy forest has to have a good, healthy aspen stand, and it's something that's part of our history and a big part of our mountain heritage. And so I'd be really opposed to any thoughts of ever going back to a Colorado blue spruce.
That's what I was going to ask, if you were talking about the Colorado blue spruce.
I think
Thank
probably
you for
in the-
sending,
We may have a bill in the future that has a deciduous tree for the state of Utah and also a fir tree for the state.
well, we can do that, right?
That's right.
So thank you for that question. Other questions?
We do. I'll tell them both to you at the same time. One person wants to know, why are we still a coal-powered state? And the other wants to know, when will church and state be truly separate in Utah?
Okay, let's start with the coal question. Anybody want to give that a shot? Senator Adams?
Yeah, coal is a great, we all know that we have clean coal in Utah, and we're able to produce some of the most cheapest, inexpensive power anywhere in the United States and anywhere in the world. And our economy is basically driven by the availability of power and energy. And as long as we can produce power by the use of coal in a very non-environmentally damaging way, in an environmentally friendly way, which I think, as you look at the way they actually burn coal, it's to our advantage to try to maintain our economy and be competitive. So I don't know why we would shift. I think it's, as we look at what's done with the energy, I think a lot of the coal hasn't had its day as far as knowing how clean it is and what little effect it has on the environment.
I think we're past the time when coal should be a concern for your particulate matter or general air pollution. The coal problem, at least the question out there, is the CO2 gases. If you drive by one of the power plants down here in central Utah, you can't even tell that anything's coming out of the smokestack.
On most days.
And consequently, with all the EPA regulations, we've really got a hold of that. And the big question is CO2 gases, and that will continue to be a debate nationally and on a world basis, because while we have been one of the biggest polluters, it's predicted that the United States, with their efforts, now will become not even one of the top. It's developing countries like India and China where we need to have a big concern, especially with CO2 gas. The other question was on, thank you for that question. The other question was on
The separation of church and state.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's an individual choice. We all have choices in the legislature of and all the information that comes from whatever entity, and it's our responsibility and our choice to give an opinion on that. I feel that that's an individual choice for each one. We have all kinds of information that comes to us, and it's our job and responsibility to dissect that and give an opinion for that. But that's the same in the citizens also in our state. They have information and they have choices, and all those opinions come to them. That's their responsibility and their right to make those choices, no matter what opinion or entity or whatever is giving them that. It's the choice.
Separation of church and state is an interesting term. That's not in the Constitution. It may have been an interpretation of the Constitution along the way, but if you read the Constitution, the First Amendment, it actually is a very proactive statement regarding the expression of religion, and that there shouldn't be a state religion. And so I don't know exactly where all that comes from, separation of church and state. There shouldn't be a state religion, but religion and the expression of religion in our state is a constitutional right. So thank you for that question also. Any other questions? Thank you very much for your participation today, and we'll be back tomorrow for another version of Senate Chat.